A first-class cabin on a transatlantic flight. The air is thick with the scent of expensive leather and simmering tension. A black man impeccably dressed is speaking quietly into his phone. A flight attendant watches him, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Minutes later, 2 uniformed security officers walk down the aisle. The metallic click of their radios cuts through the cabin's silence. They stop at his seat. Every passenger turns to watch as this man is publicly shamed, accused of being a threat, and escorted off the plane like a criminal. But just as the door is about to close, it swings open again. And what happens next will ignite a global firestorm, create a corporate hero, and expose a lie so profound it will bring a billion-dollar empire to its knees. This isn't just a story about a viral video. It's a story about how the truth always finds its way to the surface. The cabin of Apex Airlines Flight 71, non-stop from London Heathrow to JFK, was a world of curated tranquility. Polished chrome gleamed under soft LED lighting, and the scent of warm towels and champagne hung in the air. For the occupants of the first-class pods, this was a sanctuary, a liminal space suspended 38,000 feet above the Atlantic, designed to insulate them from the chaos of the world below. But on this overcast Tuesday, the insulation was failing. Dr. Samuel Adebayo settled into seat 2A. He was a tall man with a presence that seemed to fill the space without any effort. His suit was a bespoke Savile Row creation, the deep charcoal wool a testament to quiet success. He placed his vintage leather briefcase under the seat in front of him, the worn brass latches clicking softly. He was the picture of a man who belonged in this cabin, yet he was acutely aware of the furtive glances he received. He was, after all, the only black man in this section of the plane. He'd grown accustomed to it. The slight pause from the gate agent, the double take from a fellow passenger, the overly solicitous or pointedly dismissive service from the cabin crew. It was a tax he paid for existing in spaces where men who looked like him were not expected. The lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s named Karen Miller, approached him. Her smile was a taut, professional line that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff? So champagne, orange juice. Just water for now. Thank you." Samuel said his voice, a low, calm baritone with the faint, clipped remnants of a London upbringing. "Still or sparkling?" she asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Still, please." She nodded curtly and moved on. Samuel could feel her gaze linger for a second too long. He sighed internally and pulled out his phone to make one last call before they pushed back from the gate. He was calling his lead programmer back in Palo Alto. "Alex, it's Sam," he began, keeping his voice low. "Listen about Project Nova. The final diagnostic on the Omega protocol came back clean." He listened for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. The passenger across the aisle, a young woman named Chloe Davis, with a journalist's perpetually observant eyes, looked up from her laptop. The phrase, Omega Protocol, sounded like something out of a spy movie. No, that's unacceptable." Samuel continued, his voice firm but still quiet. "The margin for error on the pattern recognition has to be 0, not 0.01. 0. If we launch with that flaw, the entire system is compromised from day one. It'll generate false positives that could have significant real-world consequences. Scrub it. Rerun the entire simulation. I don't care if it takes all night. We don't proceed until it's perfect. I'll be off the grid for the next 7 hours. I expect a full report when I land." He ended the call just as Karen Miller returned with his water. She placed the glass down on his console with a little too much force, causing water to slosh onto the polished surface. "Sir," she said, her voice laced with an icy civility, "we do ask that passengers refrain from making distressing calls before takeoff. It can agitate others. Samuel looked at her then, at the placid faces of the other passengers, most of whom were lost in their noise-cancelling headphones. Distressing, I was speaking with my engineering team. You were talking about a protocol being compromised and significant consequences. She counted, her lips pursed. It's unsettling language for an airplane. Samuel felt a familiar wave of exhaustion wash over him, the interpretation of his words stripped of context and filtered through a lens of suspicion. "Ma'am, I am a software architect. I was discussing a server diagnostic. It has absolutely nothing to do with this aircraft." "All the same, sir," she insisted, her hand hovering near the call button for the purser. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down and perhaps be more mindful of your topics of conversation." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him staring at his reflection in the dark cabin window. The delay was announced a few minutes later, a minor mechanical issue. The engines remained silent. The tension in the cabin, however, began to climb. Chloe Davis from across the aisle watched the exchange, a knot tightening in her stomach. She opened a new document on her laptop and began to type, documenting the time and the conversation she'd just overheard. Something felt wrong. Karen Miller kept walking past seat 2A, her gaze like a physical weight on Samuel's shoulders. The quiet sanctuary of first class was starting to feel like a cage. The 20-minute delay stretched into an hour. The quiet hum of the auxiliary power unit was the only sound, a monotonous drone that amplified the simmering unease. Samuel Adebayo tried to focus on the technical schematics on his tablet, but the feeling of being watched was unshakable. Karen Miller had spoken to the purser, a stern-looking man who now stood near the galley, occasionally glancing in Samuel's direction. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing a further delay. A collective groan went through the cabin. This was the moment Karen chose to make her move. She walked purposefully down the aisle, her face set in a mask of grim determination. She stopped not at Samuel's seat, but at the one behind him. "Sir," she said to the elderly man sitting there, "we have an open seat in row 4. Would you mind moving? We'd just feel more comfortable." The man looked confused. "Why? We just think you'd be more comfortable there," she repeated, avoiding his question. But the implication was clear. She was creating a buffer zone around Samuel. The insult was so public, so deliberate, it took the breath away. A few passengers lowered their magazines. Chloe Davis's fingers froze over her keyboard. Samuel unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up, his 6'2" frame seeming to shrink the already spacious cabin. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Is there a problem here?" Karen turned to face him, her composure faltering for a second before hardening again. "Sir, please return to your seat. Not until you explain why you are treating me like a contagion. Why are you asking this gentleman to move?" "It's a simple security precaution, sir," the purser interjected, striding over. "A security precaution based on what precisely?" Samuel challenged, his gaze sweeping over them both. "Based on the fact that I am a black man in a tailored suit? Or was it my distressing conversation about software bugs that has you spooked?" A murmur went through the cabin. Chloe subtly angled her phone on her lap, pressed record, and made it look like she was simply reading an article. "Sir, you are becoming aggressive," Karen said, taking a half step back. It was a classic escalation tactic, painting the victim as the aggressor. "You are using coded language, you seem agitated, and now you're causing a scene." "I am causing a scene." Samuel laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You publicly humiliated me based on your own paranoid prejudices, and I'm causing the scene." The purser stepped forward, his hand raised. "Sir, I am the head of this crew, and I am telling you to sit down now, or I will be forced to call the captain." "Call him Samuel," said his voice, dropping to a steely whisper. I'd love to hear his justification for this. The purser spoke into his wrist communicator. The conversation was brief and muffled. A few minutes later, the cabin door hissed open. 2 airport security officers, their faces impassive, stepped onto the plane. They were followed by a grim-faced Apex Airlines ground manager. The passengers were now in stunned silence. This was no longer a minor disagreement. It was a full-blown incident. The ground manager, a man named Henderson, walked directly to Samuel. "Dr. Adebayo," he asked, reading the name off his tablet. "That's me," Samuel said, a weary resignation settling over him. "So the captain has made the decision, based on the crew's report, that you represent a potential security risk. Your behavior has been deemed disruptive. We're going to have to ask you to deplane." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Chloe felt a surge of adrenaline and anger. Disruptive. He was the calmest person here until they provoked him. Samuel slowly looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of the other passengers. He saw a mixture of pity-fear and, in a few, cold indifference. He had been tried and convicted in the court of Karen Miller's suspicion, and no one was objecting. "You have got to be kidding me," he said, his voice raw. "I have a board meeting in New York in 10 hours that I absolutely cannot miss. This is insane. You can discuss it with our customer service team in the terminal," Sir Henderson said, his tone final. He gestured to the security officers. "Please, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Samuel stood motionless for a long moment. He could fight. He could yell. He could refuse to move. But he knew how that story ended for a black man surrounded by security on an airplane. It ended with handcuffs, a mugshot, and his career in flames. With a profound and soul-crushing sigh, he bent down, retrieved his briefcase, and picked up his coat. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't look at the purser. He walked down the aisle, the 2 security officers flanking him like a guard of dishonor. Every eye was on him. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft click of Chloe's phone as she stopped recording and quickly uploaded the video to her cloud storage. As Samuel reached the door and stepped onto the jet bridge, a sense of abject failure washed over him. Not his failure, but the world's. The door began to close behind him, sealing him off from his destination, his career, and his dignity. The jet bridge was a cold, sterile tube. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow pallor on the faces of the security officers. For Samuel Adebayo, it felt like the longest walk of his life. Each step was a hammer blow of humiliation. He could hear the faint murmur of the passengers on the other side of the cabin door, a door that had just been sealed on his professional life. Henderson, the ground manager, was speaking into his radio. "Subject is compliant and is being escorted to the terminal. You can proceed with closing out." Just then, a commotion erupted from the end of the jet bridge. A man in an exquisitely tailored navy blue suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, was striding towards them with an air of absolute authority. He wasn't running, but he moved with a speed and purpose that made everyone else seem to be standing still. "Stop! What in God's name do you think you're doing?" The man boomed, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. Henderson turned, startled. "Sir, this is a secure area. You can't be here." The man ignored him completely, his eyes locked on Samuel. He broke into a wide, disbelieving smile. Sam Adebayo. Is that you?" Samuel stared, bewildered. He recognized the face instantly from magazine covers and keynote speeches. It was Richard Sterling, the legendary founder and CEO of Ethereum Dynamics, one of the most powerful tech companies in the world. And coincidentally, the company Samuel's own firm was about to sign a multi-billion-dollar partnership with. The meeting he was flying to New York for was the final signing ceremony. Mr. Sterling Samuel managed to say. Sterling strode forward, and in a move that stunned everyone, pulled Samuel into a firm, back-patting hug. He was a master of public gestures, and this one was a masterpiece of warmth and solidarity. He pulled back his hands, still on Samuel's shoulders. I was in the lounge, and my assistant told me Flight 71 was delayed again. Sterling said his voice, loud enough for the security officers and Henderson to hear every word. I came to see if I could get on this flight instead of my private jet, and I see them escorting my guest of honor off the plane. "What is going on here?" Henderson, now pale and sweating, stammered. "So there was a crew reported disturbance. This gentleman was deemed a security risk." Richard Sterling let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that bounced off the metal walls. "A security risk, this man. Are you out of your mind?" He turned to the other passengers who were now pressing their faces against the small windows of the cabin door, which a curious flight attendant had cracked open. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Sterling's voice rose, taking on the commanding tone of a CEO addressing a boardroom. "This is Dr. Samuel Adebayo. He is a recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant, a graduate of MIT, and the lead architect of the most important technological breakthrough of the last decade. He is not a security risk. He is my company's most valuable new partner. He is the reason our stock is projected to jump 30% next quarter." He turned back to Henderson, his eyes flashing with fury. This man was on the phone finalizing details for our project, a project that I might add has national security implications. He was probably speaking in technical language that your undertrained and paranoid staff couldn't comprehend, so you decided to haul him off like a common criminal. The jet bridge was silent. The security officers looked at each other, their impassive facades cracking. Inside the plane, Chloe Davis had her phone up again, recording through the window. This was a twist she could never have imagined. Sterling pointed a finger at the airplane door. "Open that door." "Now." Henderson, completely neutered, fumbled with his radio. Stand by." "I'm not standing by," Sterling snapped. "You will open that door. You will escort Dr. Adebayo back to his seat. No, you will escort him to seat 1A, my seat. And you will have your captain come out here and apologize to him personally. And then you will find the flight attendant who started this, and you will inform her that I will be speaking with the CEO of Apex Airlines, David Miller, a personal friend, before this plane even takes off. I will own this airline by the time I'm done with them." The threat, laced with the casual arrogance of the ultra-powerful, worked like a magic spell. Henderson spoke frantically into his radio. A moment later, the cabin door swung wide open. The purser stood there, his face ashen. Richard Sterling put a fatherly arm around Samuel's shoulder. "Come on, Sam, let's get you back on board." He walked Samuel back onto the plane. The passengers who had only minutes before watched Samuel's walk of shame now stared in awe. It was like watching a scene from a movie. The hero had arrived. Sterling stopped in the middle of the first-class cabin, ensuring everyone could see. He turned to Samuel and hugged him again, a gesture of profound public vindication. "I am so sorry you had to go through this, my friend," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. "This is not what our country or my company stands for. We'll fix this." He then looked directly at Karen Miller, who looked like she might faint. He didn't say a word to her. He didn't have to. His cold, dismissive glare was a career-ending statement. As Samuel was settled into the luxurious comfort of seat 1A, and a flight attendant rushed to bring him a glass of vintage champagne, Chloe Davis finally stopped recording. Her heart was pounding. She had just captured gold, a viral moment of corporate heroism, a stunning reversal of a racist incident. The story was perfect, a villain a victim and a powerful savior. She had no idea that the perfect story was a perfect lie. Before Apex Flight 71's wheels even touched down at JFK, the story was a global phenomenon. Chloe Davis, recognizing the explosive potential of her footage, had used the plane's expensive Wi-Fi to upload the two key videos, Samuel's humiliating removal and his triumphant return with Richard Sterling, to her fledgling YouTube channel and Twitter feed. She wrote a short, powerful thread detailing what she had witnessed, tagging Etherian Dynamics, Apex Airlines, and several major news outlets. It was like dropping a match into a tanker of gasoline. By the time they were taxiing to the gate, the videos had been viewed over 1 million times. By the time Samuel and Sterling were stepping into a waiting black car, it was 10 million. News helicopters were already hovering over JFK. The narrative was irresistible. In an age of corporate greed and social division, here was a story of a powerful CEO acting as a force for good. Richard Sterling wasn't just a billionaire, he was a corporate Captain America, swooping in to defend justice. So that cares and tells justice for Dr. Adebayo were trending worldwide. Etherian Dynamics PR team, led by the formidable Eleanor Vance, didn't miss a beat. They were masters of narrative warfare. Within an hour, they had released a perfectly crafted statement from Richard Sterling. Today I witnessed not an inconvenience, but a profound injustice. Dr. Samuel Adebayo is a brilliant mind and a man of immense character. To see him treated with such suspicion and disrespect was a stain on the values we hold dear. Etherian Dynamics stands for innovation, progress, and above all, human dignity. We will not tolerate prejudice in any form, and we stand in complete solidarity with Dr. Adebayo. This incident is a stark reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world. I did what any decent human being would have done. The stock market loved it. Etherian stock ETH surged 12% in after-hours trading. Commentators on CNBC and Bloomberg praised Sterling's decisive action, calling it a masterclass in modern corporate leadership. He was lauded for not just protecting his asset, but for his moral clarity. Apex Airlines, in contrast, was in a catastrophic freefall. Their stock plummeted. Their social media was a toxic wasteland of outrage. CEO David Miller, a man Sterling did indeed know from the golf course, was forced to issue a groveling public apology within 3 hours. The events aboard Flight 71 were unacceptable and do not reflect the values of Apex Airlines, the statement read. We have launched a full investigation, and effective immediately, the flight attendant in question, Ms. Karen Miller, has been terminated. We have extended our deepest apologies to Dr. Adebayo and are taking immediate steps to overhaul our sensitivity and bias training programs. Karen Miller became the face of entitled racist America overnight. Her full name, photo, and even her home address were leaked online. She was doxxed, threatened, and vilified by millions who had seen a 2-minute clip of her worst moment. She was the perfect disposable villain for the story. Richard Sterling, meanwhile, embarked on a victory lap. He did a prime-time interview with Anderson Cooper, his face a mask of humble gravity. It wasn't about business, Anderson, he said, looking earnestly into the camera. It was about right and wrong. I saw a good man being wronged, and I had the power to stop it. It's as simple as that. He wrote a long, impassioned post on LinkedIn about the responsibility of power, which was shared over 1 million times. Forbes ran a cover story, Richard Sterling, the CEO with a conscience. For Samuel Adebayo, the experience was surreal. He was whisked from one green room to another, positioned beside Sterling as a symbol of grace under fire. He was uncomfortable with the spotlight, but he felt a deep sense of gratitude to Sterling. The man had saved not just his dignity, but his career and the multi-billion-dollar partnership that his own smaller company, Sentient Algorithms, depended on for survival. The signing ceremony for Project Nova was a massive press event. Sterling stood with his arm around Samuel as they signed the documents. The cameras flashed, capturing the triumphant moment. A black genius and a white CEO united in progress and justice. It was the perfect image for a divided world. To the world, the story had a perfect ending. Justice was served. The racist was fired. The hero was celebrated. The victim was vindicated. The good guys had won so completely, so decisively, that it felt like the closing scene of a Hollywood blockbuster. But as Chloe Davis sat in her small Brooklyn apartment, watching the news coverage, a tiny nagging detail kept bothering her. It was all a little too perfect. Sterling's arrival was too timely. His speech was too polished. The PR response was too fast. It felt less like a spontaneous act of heroism and more like a perfectly executed play. She rewatched her own footage, zooming in on Sterling's face as he confronted the ground manager. He didn't look just angry. He looked opportunistic. And that single unsettling thought was the first loose thread that, when pulled, would unravel the entire beautiful lie. For a month, the world celebrated the story of Flight 71. Then, as with all viral moments, the world began to move on. Richard Sterling's approval ratings were sky high. Ethereum's stock had stabilized at its new elevated price. And Dr. Samuel Adebayo was back in his natural element, not a green room, but a server room working tirelessly to integrate his technology with Ethereum's massive infrastructure. He was the head of Project Nova. The public understood Project Nova in the vaguest of terms, as presented in Ethereum's glowing press releases a next-generation data analytics platform designed to enhance urban efficiency and public safety. It sounded clean, sterile, and beneficial. The reality was far murkier. Project Nova was a predictive policing system, but on a scale never before imagined. Samuel's genius was in creating an AI that could synthesize and analyze trillions of data points in real-time CCTV feeds, social media activity, credit card swipes, GPS location, data, public utility usage, and even biometric data scraped from thousands of insecure sources. The system was designed to identify patterns of behavior and predict criminal activity before it happened. The Omega Protocol, the phrase that had so alarmed Karen Miller, was the core of the system, the algorithm that assigned a threat score to individuals based on their digital and physical footprint. Samuel had justified his work with the cold logic of an engineer. The goal was noble: to stop crime, to prevent terrorist attacks, to make the world safer. He told himself that the technology was neutral. It was just code and data. But now, deep inside Ethereum's sprawling Silicon Valley campus, he was seeing how his neutral technology was being prepared for deployment. He sat in on marketing meetings where they discussed selling the system not just to police departments in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles, but also to authoritarian regimes in the Middle East and Asia. He saw internal memos that outlined the system's acceptable margin of error, a margin that, when he ran, the models showed a staggering 400% higher rate of false positives for Black and Hispanic individuals compared to their white counterparts. His perfect system wasn't so perfect after all. The data it was fed was from a biased world, so its conclusions were inevitably mathematically biased. The significant real-world consequences he had mentioned on the plane were not a hypothetical. They were the very real possibility of innocent people being flagged, harassed, arrested, or worse, based on a flawed algorithm he had created. One evening he was in a strategy session with Richard Sterling and a few top executives. They were reviewing the potential clients for Project Nova's initial rollout. The Department of Homeland Security is ready to sign a 9-figure deal for border monitoring. Eleanor Vance, the head of PR, said excitedly. And the city of Baltimore wants to pilot the urban surveillance package for their high-crime districts, another VP added. Samuel felt a cold dread creep up his spine. High crime was a well-known euphemism for predominantly black neighborhoods. Richard Samuel interjected, his voice tight. We can't do that. We haven't solved the baked-in demographic bias. The system isn't ready. Deploying it in Baltimore would be a civil rights disaster. Sterling leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He gave Samuel a patient, almost paternal smile. Sam, perfection is the enemy of progress. Of course, there are kinks to work out, but the system works. It will stop real criminals. And the optics of launching a crime prevention tool in a city like Baltimore are fantastic for our government contracts. Optics, Samuel said, his voice rising. We're talking about people's lives, my people's lives. An algorithm I wrote could send a police cruiser to some kid's door just because he bought a certain video game and posted a rap lyric on Instagram. Sterling's smile faded. His eyes grew cold. Let's be clear, Sam. Your job was to build the engine. My job is to drive the car. I decide where it goes. He paused, letting the weight of his words fill the room. And remember, that engine you built is now the intellectual property of Ethereum Dynamics, as per the very lucrative contract you signed. The contract that saved your company from bankruptcy. The subtext was clear. You work for me now. You cashed the check. Samuel felt trapped. The man who had acted as his savior on the plane was now revealing himself as his warden. The grand gesture of justice on Flight 71 now felt different. It wasn't about protecting Samuel's dignity. It was about protecting Ethereum's multi-billion-dollar investment in Project Nova and its creator. If Samuel had been arrested and discredited, the project launch would have been a PR nightmare. Sterling hadn't saved a man, he'd saved a product. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He thought about the applause Sterling had received, the talk of his moral clarity. He thought about Karen Miller, the flight attendant who had lost her job, her reputation, her life, all to serve a convenient narrative. She had been prejudiced, yes. Her actions were wrong. But in her blind paranoia, had she accidentally stumbled upon a truth far more dangerous than she could have imagined. She had heard the words Omega Protocol and significant consequences, and her mind had jumped to terrorism on a plane. The reality, a technological system of mass surveillance and social control, was infinitely more terrifying. The hero of the skies was starting to look like a monster, and Dr. Samuel Adebayo was the man who had built his wings. His crisis of conscience had begun. Chloe Davis couldn't let it go. In the weeks that followed the Flight 71 incident, the world moved on content with the simple, satisfying narrative it had been fed. But for Chloe, the story felt like a perfectly constructed movie set, impressive from the front, but hollow and propped up by scaffolding from behind. She had quit her soulless marketing job, buoyed by the small amount of ad revenue her viral video had generated, and was now trying to build a career as a freelance journalist from her cramped Brooklyn apartment. The story was her only real credential, and a nagging professional instinct told her it was incomplete. Night after night, she would re-watch her own footage, the 2 clips that had been seen by 500 million people. She muted the audio and just watched their faces. She saw the genuine humiliation in Dr. Adebayo's eyes as he was escorted away. She saw the brittle defensive fear in Karen Miller's posture. But when she watched Richard Sterling, something felt off. When he first appeared on the jet bridge, his expression wasn't one of spontaneous shock. It was one of intense, predatory focus. When he hugged Dr. Adebayo in the cabin, his eyes weren't closed in a moment of human connection. They were open, scanning the audience, ensuring the performance was landing. It was the calculated empathy of a master salesman, not a righteous Samaritan. Her suspicion festered. The Etherean PR response had been too fast, too polished. The LinkedIn post, the primetime interview, it all felt less like a reaction to an event, and more like the execution of a pre-planned campaign. Driven by this gnawing unease, Chloe decided to start with the story's designated villain. She needed to find Karen Miller. It was a descent into the digital underworld. Karen's life had been incinerated by the internet. Her social media was gone, her address was plastered on hate forums, and her phone number had been disconnected. Chloe spent days chasing cold leads, speaking to tight-lipped former colleagues and wary union representatives. Finally, she found a cousin listed on an old wedding announcement, who after a long and cautious phone call agreed to pass along Chloe's number. 2 days later, a call came from a blocked ID. It was Karen. The meeting took place in a dreary New Jersey suburb, in a small house with the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Karen Miller, the woman who had been a meme of racist entitlement, was a ghost. She was gaunt and pale, her hands trembling as she poured Chloe a cup of tea. "I know what I did was wrong." Karen began, her voice a hoarse whisper. "I want to be clear about that. I was stressed. The flight was delayed for hours. Management has been cutting staff. We're all overworked. I saw this man, so confident, so at ease in a space where I'm not used to seeing. Well, I made an assumption. A horrible, prejudiced assumption. I let my personal stress curdle into suspicion, and I profiled him. I deserve to be disciplined for that. I deserve to lose my seniority. But my life, to lose my home, to have people threaten my children." "Tell me about the phone call," Chloe said gently, sensing that the simple narrative of pure racism wasn't the whole story. "What did you actually hear that made you escalate things?" Karen closed her eyes, remembering. He used these phrases: Omega Protocol, system compromised, significant real-world consequences. It was cold corporate speak, and it terrified me. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "My husband Mark, he was a union organizer at a bottling plant. A few years back, they tried to organize for better health benefits. The corporation they were up against, some faceless conglomerate, brought in a security consulting firm. They used technology. They tracked Mark's emails, his phone records. They built a psychological profile of him. They found out a friend he confided in had a gambling problem, and they leveraged that to turn him. They destroyed the union effort and got Mark fired. It was all legal, they said. Data-driven workforce management. It broke him." She looked at Chloe, her eyes pleading for understanding. "When I heard Dr. Adebayo on that phone, talking about a protocol and a system, I didn't just hear a black man. I heard that same cold corporate power that ruined my husband. My prejudice twisted that fear and aimed it at him, and that's my shame. But I wasn't thinking about a bomb. I was thinking about men in $1,000 suits who destroy lives with algorithms from 38,000 feet. Chloe left the house with her head spinning. Karen wasn't an innocent, but she wasn't the one-dimensional monster the world believed her to be. She was a flawed, frightened woman who had become the perfect disposable villain in Richard Sterling's heroic tale. The first real break came a week later. An anonymous email appeared in her inbox. The sender was Daedalus. The message was short and chilling. "You reported the Flight 721 story. You saw the stage play, but you missed the entire production. Ethereum is not what it seems. Sterling is not who he seems. Look into Project Nova. They are building a weapon and calling it Progress. Be careful. They are watching. Chloe's heart pounded against her ribs. This was it. The whistleblower. She spent a frantic day setting up layers of encrypted communication. The back and forth with Daedalus was tense and sporadic. He was an engineer, one of the original architects of the core logic behind Project Nova, and he was consumed by guilt. I thought we were building something to stop terrorists, one of Daedalus's messages read. But they're marketing it to police departments to use in minority neighborhoods and to authoritarian regimes to track dissidents. The margin of error is a feature, not a bug. It's designed to target the vulnerable. Daedalus trusting Chloe because her reporting had at least hinted at a deeper story began to feed her documents. First came the technical specifications for Project Nova, confirming Karen's fears in horrifying detail. Next came the internal ethics board reviews that Etherian executives had commissioned and then buried, which explicitly warned of catastrophic potential for racial bias and civil rights violations. Then came the bombshell. You need to understand the timing, Daedalus wrote. Sterling didn't just get lucky. He made his own luck. A file appeared in her secure Dropbox. It contained a series of screenshots from Etherian's internal servers, all dated the day of the flight. The first was an urgent email to Richard Sterling from his head of PR, Eleanor Vance. It contained a link to an article from an investigative news site set to be published in 2 days. The headline read, Etherian's Project Nova, criticized by Ethics Board as a tool for digital redlining. The next screenshot was a frantic chat log between Vance and Sterling. Vance, Richard, this will kill us. It will frame the entire project as racist before it even launches. We need a counter-narrative, and we need it yesterday. Sterling, where is Adebayo right now? Vance in the air. Apex 71. LHR to JFK. Lands this evening. Sterling. Get me on that plane. The final image was a screenshot of Sterling's corporate travel account. His private jet had been scheduled to depart for New York at 4 p.m. At 11:30 a.m., just minutes after the chat with Vance, that booking was cancelled. A new one appeared, a first-class seat, 1A, on Apex Airlines Flight 71. The very same flight. Chloe pushed back from her desk, a gasp escaping her lips. The pieces slammed into place with sickening clarity. Sterling knew a story was about to break that would label his prized project as racist. So, in a stroke of diabolical genius, he put himself on the same plane as the project's black creator. He didn't cause the incident, but he anticipated the statistical likelihood of one. He gambled on the ambient prejudice of the world, the stress of a flight attendant, the anxieties of air travel, the unconscious bias against a black man in first class to provide him with an opportunity. Karen Miller was not a co-conspirator. She was his unwitting instrument. The delay, the confrontation, the public humiliation. It was a perfect storm that Sterling didn't start, but one he was perfectly positioned to sail into like a conquering hero. The hug, the speech, the viral videos. It was all a premeditated, brilliantly executed act of PR judo, using the force of a real racist incident to flip the narrative and shield his racist algorithm from the scrutiny it was about to receive. Chloe stared at her evidence spread across her screen. She had it all. The story wasn't just about a lie. It was about a powerful man who had built an empire on predicting human behavior and had used that dark knowledge to stage manage his own ascent to secular sainthood. She felt the immense, terrifying weight of the truth. This story would not just ruin a man, it would obliterate a myth. She picked up the phone and called the National Security Desk at the New York Times. The Sunday edition of the New York Times landed on doorsteps and digital devices, not with a thud, but with the silent seismic force of an earthquake. The article, meticulously researched and written by Chloe Davis, was given the entire front page above the fold. The headline was a masterpiece of journalistic lethality. An American hero, a calculated lie, how Ethereum, CEO Richard Sterling staged the Flight 71. Miracle to deceive the public and bury a dangerous truth. The story was a fortress of evidence. It presented the damning screenshots of Sterling's internal chats and last-minute flight change. It featured the nuanced, tragic interview with Karen Miller, contextualizing her prejudice without excusing it. It contained detailed sourced information from the whistleblower Daedalus, laying bare the discriminatory architecture of Project Nova. But its soul and its most undeniable element was the on-the-record confession and condemnation from Dr. Samuel Adebayo himself. He had provided Chloe with his own research, the very data Sterling had ordered him to suppress, proving the algorithm's profound racial bias. The initial reaction from Ethereum Dynamics was swift and arrogant. By 9 a.m. Sunday morning, their PR machine, which had once so flawlessly managed Sterling's ascent, issued a blistering denial. They called the story a disgraceful work of fiction, built on the bitter testimony of a terminated low-level employee and manipulated by an ambitious unknown blogger, masquerading as a journalist. They threatened the Times with the largest defamation lawsuit in history. It was a fatal miscalculation. They assumed Sterling's heroic public persona was an impenetrable shield. But Chloe and the Times had anticipated this. Within an hour, the newspaper's website was updated with a link to a secure data vault containing the raw, verifiable screenshots of the internal communications. The public could now see the evidence for themselves, the panicked chat logs, the flight booking, the PR strategy memo, discussing the need for a counter-narrative. The lie was not just alleged, it was proven. The digital dam broke. The wave of public opinion which Sterling had so expertly ridden reversed its course and became a monstrous tsunami aimed directly at him. Ethereum lie, Sterling, the sociopath and actual justice for Karen Miller exploded across social media. Cable news channels which had once hosted Sterling as a corporate visionary now had panels of legal experts and tech ethicists dissecting his sociopathic cynicism in real time. His LinkedIn post about the responsibility of power was flooded with millions of comments of pure vitriol before the company finally deleted the account. The hero of the skies was now the pariah of the planet. For Richard Sterling, the fall was as swift as it was brutal. The Securities and Exchange Commission, armed with irrefutable proof of his intent to manipulate the market, announced a formal investigation into Ethereum by Monday afternoon. The charge was clear. He had used a manufactured PR event based on a known falsehood to intentionally inflate his company's stock price, defrauding investors of billions. Then came the call from Washington. He was served with a congressional subpoena to testify before an emergency joint hearing of the Senate Commerce and Judiciary Committees on corporate ethics and technological overreach. His appearance was a public crucifixion, dressed in a somber navy suit that now seemed more like a costume. Sterling sat alone at a vast wooden table. The man who had commanded rooms with his charisma was visibly diminished, his answers evasive and legalistic. Under the sharp, relentless questioning of Senator Elizabeth Warren, his polished veneer cracked completely. He stammered, contradicted himself, and invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, a tacit admission of guilt that played on every news network in the world. Back in Silicon Valley, Ethereum's board of directors, composed of men and women who admired wealth far more than morality, saw the writing on the wall. Institutional investors were dumping, the stock pension funds were demanding answers, and government contracts, the lifeblood of Project Nova, were being cancelled in a cascade of press releases. In a tense 3-hour emergency meeting, the decision was made. It was a cold, pragmatic act of corporate survival. Richard Sterling, the visionary founder, was now a terminal liability. He was unceremoniously forced to resign. The official statement read that he was stepping down to focus on personal matters, a final, pathetic lie that no one believed. The karma for Ethereum as a whole was nearly as severe. The company became radioactive. Top engineering talent fled in droves. Daedalus, now protected by whistleblower status, provided Congress with a trove of other buried secrets about the company's ethically dubious projects. Facing dozens of class action lawsuits and a full-blown federal probe, Ethereum was forced to publicly and permanently dismantle Project Nova. The stock, which had once soared on the wings of a lie, was now in a terminal nosedive, a multi-billion-dollar monument to the fact that reputation once lost can never be fully recovered. Amid the ruins, however, there were pockets of quiet justice. Apex Airlines, under immense public pressure, issued a formal public apology to Karen Miller. She was offered full reinstatement with back pay and a promotion to a training position where she could share her story as a cautionary tale on the dangers of prejudice and the consequences of corporate pressure. In a televised interview, she spoke with quiet dignity, not as a villain or a victim, but as a flawed human being caught in the gears of a machine far bigger than herself. Her story became a national conversation about forgiveness and the complex nature of mob justice. Dr. Samuel Adebayo faced his own reckoning in the public square. He testified before the same congressional committee that had grilled Sterling, but his appearance was starkly different. He did not make excuses. He took responsibility for his creation and his silence. I told myself that technology was neutral, that code was without bias. He stated his voice, resonating with the weight of his regret. I was wrong. Technology is a mirror, and it reflects the values and the prejudices of its creators and the society it is born from. I created a mirror that reflected a deeply biased world, and then I allowed a lie to be built around it. My atonement for that will not be in words, but in action. He was true to his word. He was true. He walked away from the wreckage of Ethereum, cashed out his remaining stock, and poured his entire fortune into establishing the Adebayo Foundation for Ethical Technology. The Foundation's mission was twofold: to create open-source tools that could audit commercial algorithms for bias, and to provide pro bono technical consulting to civil rights organizations fighting discriminatory systems. He did not seek forgiveness, but purpose, using his genius not to predict human behavior, but to protect it. And for Chloe Davis, life had changed forever. Her exposé, The Sterling Deception, won the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. She was no longer a struggling freelancer, but one of the most respected journalists in the country. In her acceptance speech, she held up her phone. "The truth is harder to see than ever," she said. "It's buried under an avalanche of content hot takes and perfectly crafted narratives. We all have the power to capture a story in an instant. But the real work, the work that matters, is what happens next. It's the digging, the questioning, the refusal to accept the easy answer. The most heroic story is often the biggest lie." The applause was deafening, a roar of validation for the simple, difficult power of telling the truth, no matter whose perfect story it ruined. So what do we take away from this incredible story? We saw a moment that the entire world celebrated as a clear victory of right over wrong. But the truth was a twisted reflection, a lie wrapped in the language of justice. It reminds us that the stories that go viral, the ones with perfect heroes and perfect villains, are often the ones we should question the most. The line between a savior and a manipulator can be terrifyingly thin. Real life is rarely that simple, and real karma isn't about one person's downfall, it's about the entire truth coming to light, no matter how uncomfortable it is. What do you think? Was Richard Sterling a genius or a monster? Was Dr. Adebayo's redemption enough to atone for what he built? And what does this story say about our rush to judgment in the age of social media? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story made you think, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. We post stories like this every week, true stories where the drama is real, the twists are shocking, and the truth is always worth fighting for. Thanks for listening.